Isometric diagrams is one of the most effective ways to illustrate architectural concept. So in this video, I'll show you how to set up the diagram from the base principles without using any 3D software. I will then explain how to use line weights effectively and then add shadow and color for convincing presentation as well. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. To start off, launch Morpholio Trace app, tap plus sign and start a blank project. Here we want to activate ruler, go to settings and then enable 30-degree snap. Double click on the ruler to rotate it and push it to the side. Select 4.5 pen, this one here, technical pen, and then simply start drawing the base of the diagram, a city block diagram to illustrate this proposal. So this is my ground level here, and this is where my building is going to be positioned. I can now extrude the volume of the building itself by pulling up verticals and then horizontals and finding the intersection points. You can also plot the kind of context, the roads in front of the building and the little square as well. So this is my little square. I also want to show a couple of context buildings. I'm just going to notionally sketch their footprint and then pull vertical lines up, and then the same with the horizontals. And I will need to extend this ground to cover where the context buildings are placed. Now I can disable the ruler and erase the excess to make the whole thing a bit more clear. Now we can add a little bit more detail. I'll go and pick a tree stencil. You can pick any shape from over here. If you go to settings, you can pick numerous presets. I'm going to go with this one here. Scale it to the sort of right size. Pick the color I want to use. I need to be in the pen mode to enable colors, and then pick light gray and just plot a couple of trees. Now I want to show the kind of extrusion of this volume up to show the facade of this building that we're proposing over here, but clearly I'm out of space, so I'm going to enable this tool over here, select rectangle selection, and then pull across and position the drawing in the kind of middle bottom of the page, like so, and then disable this tool here and go to the layer properties and create new layer by tapping this button here. And then I wanna, you can see how it turned a bit gray, so I wanna decrease the paper opacity to not mask the layer beneath, and then go back to my technical pen tool, and over here I can select dotted line. And then what I can do is I can start pulling, making sure that I have black color selected and also ruler re-enabled. Pull the dotted lines up from this base box, like so. And now I can re-enable the solid continuous line and draw a box above in a similar kind of shape and proportion to the one beneath to represent the kind of facade extrusion. Again, I can disable the ruler to erase the excess. Now I'm going to create one more layer, and I'm actually going to increase the paper opacity because I want to start adding more details to these volumes. I'm going to turn on the ruler back on, make sure it's out of the way, and then select the pen. I'll go with 1.6 size. Actually, I'm going to start with the bottom volume. I'm just going to subdivide this volume into a kind of smaller rectangle, like so, tracking the lines along the edges of the box we created previously, and then finding the intersection points. And then I'm going to try to divide this volume into 6, and I'm going to divide this volume vertically into 6 parts to show the floors. Do it by eye, plot the lines in equal subdivisions, more or less. This is the kind of internal bit of my building. The one above will be the external envelope. You know, these floor plates are the kind of bones of the building, but we will have a kind of theater or an opera box within the building. So for that, I'm gonna plot the location of that box, use the erase tool to get rid of the excess lines once again. And now going back to technical pen and enabling the ruler, start pulling theater box extrusion. Now it's kind of hard to see how far that line has to go forward in order to be coplanar with the edge of this box, if that makes sense. So for that, what I can do is I can turn the dotted line and kind of project project this line over here down to reach the bottom of that line here, and we know that that line in the bottom is coplanar with the base cube volume. So now we can what we can do, we can kind of pull it towards the edge, and once again, because this surface is coplanar with where we want the box to end, we pull it up, and this is the intersection point, literally where this box would end. And now we know for sure that how much that extrusion needs to go forward. And again, just to make things clear, erase the edges. And also these guidelines, I'll get rid of them. Okay, so now my kind of basic proportions and everything is shown. Now I can start adding a bit more detail. So I'll start showing floor thicknesses. Again, need to remember to enable the line assist. So I kind of wanted these floor thicknesses to start on the edge, on the side of the line that would make the subdivisions kind of the same. So I can see some of these divisions are slightly larger than others. I'll pick the side to which, show the extrusion depending on where I want the spacing to equalize, if that makes sense. I can also show the vertical kind of columns that support the building. Once again, we can add the thickness to these columns. Not really worried about being super kind of perfect with these, because we will have a pass over these lines. You'll see that later in the video. So it's just to get the basics correct. So I'm just plotting the base of these columns so I can remember where to put them when I trace over. You can also add a couple of subdivisions to this theater box, kind of following the structure, being in line with the structure and the columns, and also side subdivision. And then what I probably want to have is a kind of structure as well, indicatively, that supports the base of this box. And then I might as well indicate the thickness of the edges of that box. Don't know if that serves any particular purpose, but I'll just show them anyway, so I think they add to the interest. And lastly, I might add a stair. I'll plot it in a kind of elevation along this facade, so my ruler is enabled, and as I pull the line, see it's restricted, but if I want to unrestrict it, I just need to single tap on the screen and it allows me to move it where I want. So my stair is actually going to probably start somewhere here, go all the way to the first floor, and then from first floor have a little space from here to here, and then pull the stair up once again, and then finally to the third floor. At landings, I can re-enable the snap to the grid and pull the line forward like so. So each of these landings are pulled forward, and then again, starting with the bottom, unrestrict the line, restrict it again, and then track it along the elevation that we've already drawn. So it's almost like an extrusion, a 3D extrusion that starts from the side of the building and then pulls forward. I actually want to, for the stair, a little opening in the slab, so this floor will have an opening to allow people to pass through, and the same on the floor above. And luckily, these openings in the floor coincide with where the free space between columns is, so that's quite good. Again, I'll enable the eraser, unconstrain, reduce the size of the brush, and then just delete the excess. Going to adjust the pitch of these stairs because they're not quite in line, and erase the excess once again. So hopefully now these stairs make a little bit more sense. Pitch of the flights is the same. So for the volume above, so now what I want to do is I want to create a new layer once again, and I want to keep the same thickness of the pen and subdivide this box, and I'll use the same number of subdivisions as the diagram below, so it coincides with the volume below. And again, I'll do it by eye, try and get the spacing of these lines more or less the same. And then I want to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 subdivisions to the front. I'm going to do this by eye, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pretty good. And then finally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 subdivisions on the elevations. Then I want to hold that layer and drag it just underneath the one below, which is the layer where I'm going to start adding details. So on Morpholia Trace, to activate the layer, you need to double tap it. Once it's yellow, that's the active layer. So I know the top layer is now active and I can start adding details. Start picking the solid bits of the facade first and track along the guidelines. I can add thickness to those solid bits as well, and the parapet for the roof. And then again, using the kind of geometry I have in front of me to try and plot the divisions on the glass elements that are further recessed into this volume. For that, I'll use the edge of my guidelines to mark these little projections, just so I know roughly where to pull the lines from. And now I can create openings in the glass facade. So I probably want an opening there, a kind of extrusion within the cube, just for artistic kind of effect. Maybe it symbolizes or signifies an entrance into the building. Again, I'll restrict the height to where the guides are intersecting. This is going to be my second extrusion on this side. You can see that these don't quite match up, so just delete these lines and start again. Okay, so hopefully that looks a little bit better. Okay, so now these two volumes are kind of sketched out. I have my extrusions in the facade, I have the glazing in the middle, and then I have the kind of cladding, a solid cladding at the top here. I'll just decrease the paper opacity of that layer all the way down. The same with the layer below, so that I can see everything in equal intensity. Now what I want to do is I probably want to get rid of some of these line thicknesses in the middle of the box, and also the guide layer. Just delete that. Once the layer is deleted, it cannot be undone. So now here, this layer, I want to get rid of these lines, thicker lines in the middle. Disable the ruler to make the process easier. And then the same on the layer underneath. Again, enable it by double tapping, and then just simply start erasing the excess lines. Might actually do that with this middle dotted line as well, just more clear what's going on. And then creating new layer once again at the very top, and then picking the pen as before, actually sticking to the thinner line weight. I now want to sketch a kind of portion of this theater over here, so it's kind of a zoom in and a slice through that box to show what's going on inside. So for that, I'll activate the ruler, and I'm gonna, just as we did before, start pulling lines, so horizontal and the kind of vertical ones. You can see I'm kind of out of space, so I'll go to the select tool, activate rectangle, and just kind of position the size of this thing roughly the way I want it to be. Sort of like that is okay. Tap again on the select tool and just finish, again making sure that the ruler is on, finish the volume. And I want to also actually show the internal bits of this, so I'm going to pull the lines at the back as well, and as before, erase the excess for clarity. It's best to kind of, as we progress with this drawing, to keep it tidy, because there's quite a lot of lines, as you can see. If we don't keep it tidy, it will get pretty confusing very quickly. So now once I have this volume here, you can imagine that, you know, this surface here is almost kind of the elevation of this 3D shape. So I want to show a stage and a rake of the seating. So activate the pen tool, start showing the stage in the kind of, these would be the kind of steps where the seats would be positioned. And then once I have this elevation, I can kind of extrude it towards the back wall. So if I pull the end of the stage first and the back of the stage then after, that's basically how far I need to push each of these lines. Obviously, again, it's hard to say how long they should be, and that's why I'm going to use the crossovers of these lines. It's important to make sure that all lines cross at all times for a convincing effect. At this point, I'll erase the excess lines again. Okay, it's time to show the balconies as well. So I'll extrude up where I want my balconies to be, and then kind of plot a couple of them in, more or less the same spacing. And then I want to track them around all the way to the stage. So for that, create a guide, extrude that guide, and make the depth of that balcony on this side the same as on this side. And then by pulling line down over here and also over here, all the way to the floor. I know my floor is here because it coincides with this edge, and then starting pulling the balconies towards the horizontal lines where the intersections are. And actually I can see that I need a ground floor balcony as well, but I have my auditorium seating rake over here in the way, so I want to kind of portray illusion that the auditorium stops at this line. So for that I'm going to do essentially what I've done at the back, but this time I'll be tracking from this point here rather than that point to portray the illusion of a ground floor balcony starting. So to make it clear, just get rid of these unnecessary lines. This starts to look pretty good. I might just add a couple more lines and add the thickness to these balconies as well. Each theater where we have a stage has a kind of curtain backdrop, so I want to show that as well. For that I'll just be pulling a box. This is the box that is kind of extruded up from the stage, and then that box is probably going to coincide the half point between the two balconies. Delete the excess for clarity. And then subdivide these curtain drops once more in about 4 divisions. And let's add thickness 2. Okay, that looks pretty good. I might just add a little backstage door through here. And also subdivide these floors to show some support pillars. Before I do that, I'll just add thickness to that last balcony, and then more as we did before, show a couple of divisions and then add thickness to those. You know, this first side is flush, but then these columns will actually have a depth, and that's why I have 3 lines. And then that line at the base is kind of diagonal, like so. I guess just to portray the illusion of the kind of thickness and the structure being there. I'll do the same with these ones. So show 2 lines first, and then the third one to the side of it, and then at the base pull diagonal line. Choose the thickness and erase the crossovers for clarity. This one at the edge will actually have diagonals in both directions. Lastly, I'll just add a couple of railings. With the corresponding thickness, it's much easier to start adding these details once the base structure is done. I usually like to, as you can see here, do them all at the same time. That way I don't miss a thing. So if I want to, pull same objects in the same direction, there's multiple of them. I'll do that at the same time, as well as like erasing bits like you can see here. And then let's add subdivisions for these railings too. Although I will have a second pass to tidy up this drawing, I kind of don't want to go too wild on this base layer because it can get distracting. So I'm trying to already in this base layer to more or less have at least the subdivisions of the railing equal. And perhaps what I can also do, just so it's clear in the next pass where I have to end, is to do a bottom line as well, just to define the end of these railings. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. I might actually add to this axonometric the thickness of the walls that go around. Okay, that looks good. I'll decrease the paper opacity so we can see the bottom layers are a bit more clear. Over here, I'll just make one quick adjustment. I'll pull the floors across, something I forgot to do the first time round. And I'll erase this line here, and actually this horizontal line as well, just so we can see the edges of the floors exposed. So this looks pretty good. I'll pull the axle above a little bit lower so that I can maybe scale it down just a touch so I can draw a circle around it to show that that part is actually extruded from this volume at the bottom. So creating a new layer, this time selecting protractor tool and then scaling it to the correct kind of size more or less. Now that I have it, I just select the pen tool as before, but now I want to have a dotted line, and then I'll go for a fairly thick line weight, 6.4, and I'll drag the circle around. Maybe actually that line weight is a bit too thick, so I'll revert back to 4.5 and just do the same. It looks a little bit better. Just wanted that circle to be a little bit more away from these context buildings, so I'll select it and move it out a little bit, and then I'll do the same with the layer underneath. So that axle is in line with the circle. just scale it a little bit, place it within centrally. Activate the protractor tool once more, but now this time around just kind of zooming into this volume. On the same layer, mark the circle, go back to the ruler and unconstrained line and kind of pull it, these circles in tangent with one another. Decrease the paper opacity and also decrease the drawing opacity so that those lines are less kind of in your face. What I can do at this point as well is to reduce some of this line work. To do that, I'll just go on this layer underneath, increase the paper opacity for it, and then using the pen, solid line work and 1.6 pen thickness, I'm just gonna add thinner lines over here and also to this road. I show the kind of thickness notionally of the road paving. It's a bit kind of exaggerated, but that's okay. I might also kind of plot in this square bit just in front of it too. So there'll be a kind of change in texture where the building meets the ground. Now that's done, scale back the opacity of the drawing by reducing paper opacity of this layer, and I'm going back to the base layer and erasing the excess thicker lines, disable the drawing assist and increase the thickness of the eraser. You can see instantly that I forgot to trace some of the lines, but that's again quite alright. I can come back and add the missing bit here just in a second. Before I do that, I'll select 4.5 points and just so I can remember when I trace over this to not forget this road extrusion here. And then going back to the top layer and going back to 1.6 points, just complete that bit. Actually, I need to erase the middles of these buildings too. I might just do a quick outline of this axonometric with a thicker pen line. Now for this next part, I'll just do a kind of quick time lapse to go over again all of this drawing and just tidy it up and make it a bit more sharp and presentable. Okay, so now that I'm kind of happy with where this is at, it's time to add some color to it. For that, I'll create a new layer on the top and I'll send it blending mode to darken. And this is going to allow me to draw colors on top while seeing the lines underneath. I've created this custom color palette over here, which consists of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors. If you're interested, these are the codes for the blue, dark blue, light yellow, orange, gray and dark gray. So I'll start with the roller tool first, just to cover all the solid elements of the building. And then I'll use the pen tool with 6 points to cover the edges. I might actually use the ruler tool to snap to the grid. And then select the lighter color for the glass windows. I'll then proceed to color the rest of the bits in this time lapse. The logic behind the coloring is to basically give all the external volumes kind of bluey color, and all the internal volumes would have a more warm tone. And then this external terrace on the very outside would be orange, and everything else would be gray. I use darker gray for the roads. And then let's use light gray for the remaining bits of this. Just increase the opacity of the trees so that they're not lost, and then continue with shading the gray bits in. I use orange for the square to define the kind of heart of the landscape. And I might also use this dark blue for the edges of this base plate. Okay, this looks pretty good. Now I'm going to turn off the colors for a second, create a new layer, decrease the paper opacity. I'm gonna do the same approach, but I'm gonna focus on the shadows, bits where I think the shadows are gonna go. I'm just gonna increase the drawing opacity ever so slightly so I can see the lines underneath and I don't cross them too much. At this point I could also use this tool over here, which allows to kind of color in the bits of this drawing more quickly. It has limitation in that it doesn't quite work sometimes on the edges. It leaves kind of soft edges, but you know, it's still better than kind of doing everything manually, although I will touch up the corners so that the edges are not soft as they are at the moment. And I'll just follow where I think the light would naturally shine from, which is maybe from that side. So everything kind of, all the surfaces that are facing this way would be in shadow. I'm just gonna add the shadow on these steps too. Again, just to go that extra mile and getting convincing results in showing the shadow. As a kind of starting point, and then I can do the same for these rest of the volumes. So I'll start with the facade first. I'm going to kind of cheat, so the shadows here are cast from the geometry within, but then outside this block, as you can see beyond the thicker line, I'll pretend that that volume itself is casting shadow. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good. I'll decrease the drawing opacity so that I can see more of the geometry. Enable the color. I think I'll decrease the drawing opacity of the color. One more thing before I forget is the projection lines upward, so I'll add them in. And I think that's pretty much it. If you enjoyed this video, you might also like this other video right over here that also picks up on axonometric diagrams inside Morpholio Trace app. It talks through a bunch of different approaches you can use to set up these diagrams and make them Illustrator-like without spending as much time as you would normally. And this video over here is about setting up your first drawing inside Morpholio Trace app. So if this is something that interests you, then check those videos out. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.